My name is Frank Kodak, and today, December 12th, 2013, I am pleased to have the opportunity to speak with Alan Moy, Associate Dean for Information Technology and Library Services at DePaul University College of Law. Our conversation is part of the Oral History of Law Librarianship Project, a component of the Spinelli Law Library Reference Shelf on Hein Online. The setting for this conversation is the conference room at the headquarters of the American Association of Law Libraries in downtown Chicago. Alan, it's a great pleasure for me to speak with you today about your life and career as a law librarian.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here. This is a really important thing that you guys are doing. I'm glad that you included me.
Well, it's our pleasure to do that. Let's begin by learning a little about you personally, Alan.
Sure.
Can you tell us about your early life, where you were raised, your family background, and what your childhood was like?
Sure. Well, I was born in North Carolina, but moved when I was about 3 years old to Philadelphia, which is where I was raised. My family actually goes back to in North Carolina for many generations, and I actually did some genealogy on that, so that's kind of a hobby of mine. I had an uneventful childhood. It was, a stable home. My parents were big on education. My mother was a nurse. My stepfather was a metallurgist. And so for a time I actually thought I was going to go into science. But by the time I got to high school, I started kind of souring on that a little bit. And so decided to pursue some other careers.
I see. Very good. You've already talked a little bit about what your interests are, but before we get into your professional life, let's talk about you personally. What are some of your hobbies, passions, pursuits outside of librarianship?
Well, as I mentioned, family genealogy. I've been doing it for about 30 years.
Wow.
So we've amassed quite a huge collection, and I've connected with many different branches of the family.
Yes.
My other hobby is riding my bike, and Chicago's a great city for that, particularly along the lakefront. Wouldn't ride in this weather.
I was
It's a
going to
little
say,
chilly.
1 degree out this morning, probably not.
Wouldn't try that. I don't know in terms of other hobbies. Those are some of the main ones I have. Research, but that's kind of work related too.
Good. Well, now that we know a little bit about your personal life, can you tell us about your educational and professional training, perhaps your early career aspirations?
Well, like many law librarians, I didn't necessarily set out to become a law librarian. As I said, I was interested in science. In fact, at one time thought I was going to be a doctor. But by the time I got to undergrad, I went to Howard in D.C.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of started trying to figure out, well, what do I really want to do? And I wasn't sure. I majored in sociology and minored in economics. The first job I had after graduation was with the FBI. Yeah, I know, I wasn't an agent, a very low-level clerk. But it was, a sense of organization, categorization, that sort of thing was part of the job. And so I did like that. I also worked as a counselor at Northern Virginia Community College for a period of time. And I think after I'd done that for about a year, I started thinking about law school. In fact, friends and family would say, you might consider this. But it wasn't anything that was definitely on the radar screen. It was just kind of there. Mm-hmm. I went to one of the recruitment fairs and ran into a woman I used to work with, or had worked with before, who was now teaching at the University of Richmond. And she talked a lot about the school. She said it was a small environment, very supportive. And so that kind of piqued my interest. And I actually decided to apply to one school, University of Richmond.
Wow.
And that's the one I got into.
Very good. So tell us a little bit about your time as a student at Richmond. At that point in time, were you thinking law is what I want to do with my degree?
At first, but I think by the end of my first year, I started looking for an alternative career. I did some work with a criminal defense attorney, because I thought I was interested in that. But and he was very good, but I found it just didn't fit. I worked in the law library, and I kept getting a lot of encouragement from law librarians that worked there about this being a career, and I had no clue what they were talking about, because it just didn't seem like a career path,
right.
At least not one that I was aware of. And what I didn't realize was that it was actually unfolding before my eyes, that as I continued to work in the law library and gather experience, I was actually, my career was becoming, materializing.
So, did you start there in the law library from your first year in law school?
Yeah, I think second semester. Yeah.
And worked throughout the time that
Pretty
you were a law
much.
student?
Yeah, I did do an internship with what was then called the Industrial Commission, which they handled workers' compensation cases,
Okay.
which also kind of solidified my resolve to find an alternative career, because what I really liked was the research that I did for the judges there. So.
I see. So let's move on then to your professional career. You earned your JD at Richmond, and then you began as a reference librarian and an instructor at your alma mater, University of Richmond, in fall 1990. So you had the JD degree, but not yet a library degree.
Sure.
That used to be a fairly common path.
Right.
Someone would earn a JD and then become a librarian without the library degree. It's not so much anymore, I don't believe.
Right.
Did you feel in that first job that you were hampered in any way by not having the formal library training?
Well, somewhat. I mean, I have to say, no one, I think, at work made me feel any different. I mean, I just felt that in order for me to move forward, that I would need to have the MLS degree. It was a little difficult at the time. I was married, had a small child, so I had to bring money into the house, so I needed to work. Real life intervened,
that's
right? But it was something that was in the back of my mind. And I said, well, if I'm going to pursue this as a career, in order to feel legitimate, I really do need to get the library degree. The people I worked with there at Richmond, Steve Hinckley, Sally Wambald, Joyce Jandal, they all encouraged me that I should do it, but it wasn't anything that they said, well, you're not as good or anything, or it didn't make me feel as though I wasn't as good not having it. But it was something that I wanted to do.
And I guess as a reference librarian, at least answering legal research questions, probably the most relevant training is the training that you get as a law student.
As a law student. And in fact, that's who I primarily worked with, were the law students. Just to kind of back up a little bit, I was hired in a temporary position because Joyce Janto, who was the associate director at the time, went on maternity leave. And I don't know if you know her daughter, she's like 20-something years old, so you know how long ago that was. But so I was only supposed to be there during the time that she was out to fill in for her class, because I'd helped her before when I was a student there. So I took the class, and I really, really enjoyed that. I didn't even know I was going to enjoy it as much as I did until I started doing it, and having to prepare the lessons and so forth. And so when she returned from maternity leave, what Steve Hinckley, who was the director at the time, he lobbied for a position for me. I think it started out as a part-time position, after the full-time,
Sure.
and then he lobbied it into a full-time position to.
So your work at that point included not just reference work, but also as an instructor, you were teaching legal research courses?
To first-year students, yeah.
Very good. Okay. So then at some point you had some short stints as a reference librarian, law clerk at a Richmond law firm, and as law librarian at the Chesterfield County Law Library in Virginia.
That's true.
Tell us a little bit about those.
Well, the way that came about was kind of in that interim period of time when they were trying to create a full-time position, but they only had a part-time, so I was filling in and working part-time, and obviously becoming a librarian all along, because that's where I was focused at the time.
Very good. But despite that, you left library work altogether and spent 2 years at the Mickey Company in Charlottesville as a law editor.
Yeah.
So first, I'm interested about that. Now that we have your whole career arc, well, not your whole, but you're up to now. Your career arc, we understand where that went. That's sort of like a bump in that career path in a way, so I'm interested in that.
Somewhat. It was a unique opportunity that presented itself at the time. I think, if I get the dates right, the position that Steve had created, either I think it was stalled or something had happened where I didn't quite have the full-time position. I think he still had part-time work for me, but didn't have full-time, but I needed a full-time job.
Sure.
Mickey at the time, they were trying to expand their law code section, and in fact, one of the things that's interesting, I guess the 6 degrees of separation, is that they were opening up another division to work on the Illinois state code.
Oh.
And that was the first project that I was put on. It didn't turn out to be as successful as I think Mickey wanted it to be, but it was interesting work, with the exception of I didn't have as much human contact as I really wanted. Because as an editor, you're just kind of working with documents all day. There was an opportunity where we would work on projects collectively, but that was just few and far between. So that was the only part about doing that work that I really didn't like. I think by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I had to go talk to somebody.
Great human contact.
Exactly. So, but it was interesting, in terms of the
Just to
the
clarify,
detail.
so then you were editing primary authority
Yes.
statutory material.
And there was actually two roles I had there. The first one was editing primary material, and the second role was working with authors, editing their material, preparing it for
So
publication.
secondary authority,
Secondary
treatises.
treatises, right.
Well, so just to bring this full circle, eventually you go back into librarianship. So what I'm wondering is, did your experience of working with a law publisher, has that helped you in your subsequent positions as a law librarian?
Actually, I think it has. It gave me, I guess, a wider perspective or understanding of the whole arena related to, law, publishing, academia, that sort of thing. So I think I have a better understanding of what happens as far as the publishers are concerned and what their primary focus is.
That would make sense. I know that librarians frequently complain that the publishers really don't understand their environment, but I think probably the reverse is also true, that
Yeah.
librarians don't understand what's going on in the publishing world. So, very interesting. So now we're up to June 1994.
Okay.
This
I
is
feel
your
like
life.
this is my life.
Yeah, there you go. You did finally return to the University of Richmond as a full-time reference research services librarian, position that you held for 3.5 years before leaving to become Associate Director of Public Services at George Mason University School of Law Library. So that's about what I would term a kind of a formative 10-year span, period when you greatly expanded your areas of responsibility, but also earned your MLS
Yes.
at Catholic University. So tell us a little bit, just kind of reflecting on that whole period of time.
Right. By that point, I was pretty much on the trajectory that this was a career path. And once the position at Richmond had been solidified and I was selected for it, I really felt that I needed to get the MLS if I wanted to move into middle management and ultimately to a directorship. Steve was very, very influential in that area in terms of letting me know what my options were, how best to go about doing it. At the time, Virginia did not have a master's program in library and information science, but they had reciprocity with Catholic University, so that you could enroll in the program at Catholic at state rates, because someone, and this was before online and distance learning had really matured, someone from Catholic would come down to the Richmond area, and they would teach the course.
Oh, so you
certain
didn't
courses.
physically have to...
Well, there was a period where there was a residency, so you could take certain preliminary courses up to a period of time, and then you would have to do your residency in DC. So I started out that way, kind of slow, taking whatever courses were available as I was working as a reference librarian and gaining more experience. Steve was great. He gave me the opportunity to do just about anything I wanted. He always listened to any suggestions I had, and if it was crazy, he might not say that right away, but he would certainly give me an opportunity to expand and grow and have experiences. It was really a good period for me because I felt at that point, after kind of waffling a little bit in terms of a career, I thought I finally found one. I felt very comfortable. To be perfectly honest, it just didn't feel like work. I mean, and, it wasn't drudgery or anything like that. And I think what some people may consider to be drudgery about that type of work, I enjoy.
So the kinds of things you were doing as a librarian sort of fit your personality and fit your skill set and were comfortable.
Well, yeah, exactly. I think the contact I had with students was really important to me. Part of the role that I had there at Richmond at that time was I worked really closely with the Black Law Students Association. I was not a faculty member, I was a staff member, but I kind of served as somewhat of a quasi-faculty advisor, and very, very supportive in their programs, and because I had been involved with BALSA, Black Law Students Association, when I was a student. And so the recognition that they gave me in terms of the help that I provided, I think that was rewarding.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. So then you moved on to George Mason, where you were associate director there. Tell us about how that came about, and obviously this would be an expansion of responsibilities and.
Yes. Well, again, owing to Steve Hinckley. I don't know if you know, but
I know Steve Hinckley very well. Let's just say he's at Penn State now,
Yes.
doing a great job there.
Absolutely. Well, he had moved to George Mason at the time from Richmond.
Right.
I think he'd been gone maybe a couple of years, and he approached me about this, associate directorship at George Mason. I wasn't necessarily too keen on moving at the time, but it really kind of worked out well because my residency for finishing the program at Catholic was about to come up. So I was going to have to be in the D.C. area for a period of time anyway. And so it opened up a new door for me. It gave me more responsibility. George Mason at the time was, well, I'm trying to remember, they were not quite in the top tier at that point, but shortly after I arrived is when they moved
They were
into
moving forward.
Yeah, they were moving forward. So they were really on a trajectory. They were in an old building at the time, and a new building was being built. That was also part of the experience I had when I was there to actually physically move the library, and that was stressful, but a great sense of accomplishment once you get something
Absolutely.
like that done.
Sure.
So I'm trying to think.
I would assume that you had more supervisory responsibilities in that role than perhaps you did at Richmond.
Absolutely, it expanded because at Richmond I didn't directly supervise the circulation staff. I worked with them, but I didn't supervise them. But when I moved to George Mason, I had the responsibility of supervising reference as well as circulation. So it was challenging. Now, Steve left shortly after I got there, and then Deborah Keene came. And Deborah Keene was also very supportive with any idea I had for doing something new or different or collaborating with the legal research and writing instructors. We created a program there based upon an idea she had for the liaisons, the faculty liaisons, and working closely with them.
Very good. So at this point, were you thinking already thinking directorship that's where my goals are, or had you not gotten that far into your thinking?
I think by the time I got to Mason, it started to crystallize that one of the feeling, I can do this. You get that sense that you take on so much at an associate level that it was it's like a preparation, a proving ground, and if you have some successes, then you get the sense that okay, I possibly could take this.
Yeah, and you can sort of look at the path that you've already taken and see, well, I'm building up to that ultimate goal. Should the opportunity arise, and should I conclude that that's really what I want?
True. Yeah.
Absolutely good. Well, in fact, the opportunity did arise, and you came to your current institution, DePaul University College of Law here in Chicago, in 2005 as director of the law library and associate professor of law. So, in addition to a new city and a state, your duties and responsibilities expanded from those in your previous positions. I'm interested to know. So, you've been now almost a decade.
Almost,
We're
coming up
approaching
9 years in January.
Yeah. What has it? But it's been a volatile decade, to say the least. So it leads me to ask, what has it been like to lead an academic law library in what we might euphemistically refer to as interesting times?
Yeah, interesting is a good word. Changing, evolving. I think when I first started at DePaul, one of the things that stood out for me was the fact that the previous director, I don't know if you know Judy Gaskell, had been there for 20 years and had built up a really solid traditional library. But I felt that in some ways they were lacking the connection to the 21st century. They had some electronic databases, but they didn't really use them. There was no mechanism for instructing people in how to use the databases or how they could be helpful to them in their research or anything. So I wanted to try to bring the library up to date. So when you say these interesting times, I think DePaul was kind of behind a little bit already, and so my goal was to kind of bring them up to where I thought they should be. And then things started to evolve a little bit more. In terms of what's happening in the legal profession, and then just generally in academia, with enrollments being lower and so forth. So my feeling about that is that it presents some challenges, but I think that as librarians, I mean, I think we're going to survive. We may look a little different. We may do some of what we do a little differently, but we're certainly going to, be around. There's always going to be a need to have somebody to, categorize, classify, organize information, and make it available. And we'll be doing that in different ways. We're doing it differently than we did 20 years ago.
Absolutely.
So we just have to kind of stay informed and abreast of, what's going on, and use the technology to the best of our ability. One of the things I think, as far as the law is concerned, unlike some other professions, the legal profession is a little behind in that, in terms of adapting certain technologies to, to their uses, their profession. The medical profession way ahead, I mean, I'm not saying anything that you don't know,
No.
others don't as well, but the point is, I think that because of the discipline that we are, preparing people to work in, itself is going through, a metamorphosis or change, an adjustment. We have to make the adjustment as well in terms of how we teach them, to prepare them for the world they're going to be.
Their roles are changing
changing.
themselves,
Yeah.
which necessitates some change
On
as
our
to
part.
how we do
Exactly.
prepare them for it, absolutely. Well, and sort of in line with that, again, a very good segue to the next question I wanted to pose to you, which is 7 years afterwards, in July 2012, you became Associate Dean for Information Technology and Library Services, again taking on new responsibilities and the supervision of personnel related to technology. So that really fits in precisely with what you're talking about. I've often wondered when I look at someone in that position overseeing both the library and technology, whether that pulls the director in perhaps in too many directions, causing the library to suffer. I'm curious as to your take on it. It would sound like from your previous question that you wouldn't necessarily agree with that.
Well, I mean, I may not agree, but I think that question should be posed to my library staff. I mean, I think you have to be careful. I think that can happen. As you know, it's extremely demanding to try to juggle those two areas. They are related but different, even to the point of the types of individuals that you're going to deal with in technology are very different than the types of individuals you'll deal with in a library. And so that was kind of my first, I guess, what's the right word for it? The word I'm thinking of has come up, but that's not really what I'm saying is I had to learn.
It was an awakening.
It was an
perhaps.
awakening for me that I thought I could just deal with the people who, the IT people the same way, and you can't. They're very different, and you have to approach them differently, and the expectations are different. So I have to kind of wear two hats, and I have on when I'm dealing with my IT people. And I mean, I know enough about IT to be dangerous, but it's not my area, and so in that sense, I defer to their knowledge, their information. My goal is to provide them with the resources that they need to meet those goals. We work together to, we collaborate to come up with what those goals are and make sure they make sense with everything else that's going on. But you have to have respect for what they do, if you've got good people. And it's similar with the library, but again, different personalities are drawn to, library work. Even at a more granular level, when you talk about people who work in public services versus those in tech services, different personalities. So, again, and I think as an administrator, that's part of what we need to do. We need to be aware of the different personality types that we're dealing with. And the point is to motivate them, to get them to do what it is that you need them to do, but also for them to want to do it. Yeah.
It's interesting. I've always thought that the one thing that the library brought to the technology arena when you were in this sort of situation was a full acceptance of the service mentality that might not always exist. I don't want to overgeneralize about IT folks, but I kind of feel that IT people feel if they've developed the expertise and the knowledge of the technology, then they've done their job.
Right.
And really, that's ultimately a small part of their job, because if they're not utilizing it to let people...
Right. It has to be translated
That's
into
right.
a way that the user can make sense
Yeah.
of. Yeah.
So maybe what you're saying totally makes sense in terms of needing to recognize where librarians are coming from, where technology people are coming from, but maybe to bring that service mentality to the IT folks. Well, we've talked a lot about your professional experiences. Very, very interesting and fascinating, and you're right in the mix and will be for many years to come on these changes that are occurring and will continue to occur. I guess you earlier talked about the fact that you felt when you arrived at DePaul that maybe they were a little behind, and I think that I'm sure you did not mean that as a criticism of previous. It just that's at that right about at that point in time, things still moved relatively slowly, and all of a sudden, that's gone.
It happened very quickly. And you're right, I didn't mean that as a criticism, not at all. And of course, I've spoken to Judy many times about the library, and I was grateful that she handed me a library that was in such good shape.
Sure.
But I also felt that, it was a library that was more for the 1990s, in the sense that it was good for that time period. But we needed to bring it up to date and to make it a little more accessible for the students of this era,
Right.
and faculty too now, because many of the faculty come in with certain expectations about technology being available to them. And that it might have been there, but it just wasn't promoted and made known in the way that it should have been.
Sure. Well, I've always thought that the 1990s seemed like they took about 25 years, and the 2000s seemed like it took about an hour. So,
right.
Yeah. Well, we've learned a lot about, as I say, these professional experiences, but let's switch gears a little bit. You've already mentioned some of the individuals that have been important to you in your career, but I'd like to focus on that more specifically. So you talked about Steve Hinckley in particular as being what I would term to be a mentor, or at least a role model. I wonder if there are others, or just others in the profession that you really admire.
I mean, Steve, of course, because he's been so instrumental for so many years and influential for so many years. Tim Coggins, also at Richmond. Gail Warren from, I didn't mention, but I also worked at the State Supreme Court, Virginia Supreme Court, for a period of time while I was a student, and worked with Gail Warren there.
Very good.
Again, somebody that encouraged me to go to library school and become a librarian. And I mentioned Deborah Keene. I think I've had I've been fortunate to have worked with some really good people, and who've given me some great opportunities to grow, expand, and develop. So.
Very good. Very good. Let's switch gears and move from your professional career as a librarian to your service to the law library profession. And I know that's been important to you. You've had a variety of roles there, and including serving as chair of ALL's Committee on Diversity and as a member of several other important committees, including the annual meeting Program Planning Committee, the Nominations Committee, the Leadership and Mentoring Committee, all extremely important committees of AALL. Can you share some stories or some memories about those experiences and what they've meant to you, both personally and professionally?
Well, I can say I've been involved with AALL for going on, I think, about 20 years now that I think about it. I think the first meeting was in '94. I think it was '94. Everyone was very welcoming. I mean, as soon as my very first meeting, just about everyone I ran into, they were warm and they were glad to see me. Glad I was there, and it made me feel like, okay, this is an organization I think I can work with. I felt comfortable. So being involved in the different committees, it's somebody calls and asks for help or needs me to work on something. I feel sure, why not? Because I think it's a great organization. I don't know. I mean, as far as stories, I remember when I worked with the Diversity Committee, and I can't remember what year, but we had arranged for a program, and there was a speaker that was coming, and it was one of those where I wasn't sure if the speaker was going to show up. You're just sweating bullets. You don't know, and because I really wanted everything to go off very well.
Sure.
And I think it wasn't until the last minute that we knew for sure that the speaker was coming. And he came and he did a great job.
Great.
So it worked out well.
Good. Yeah. Well, that does happen, and it's a little scary and anxiety producing at the time. Yeah. So in addition to that national service, you've also been an active member of 3 chapters: Chicago, Virginia, and the Southeastern Association. Just in personal terms, what has it meant? So not just the national, but these local groups. What has that meant to you to be?
I think that's important because it keeps you in touch with people in the local community. I have to say I haven't been as active lately with Chicago because of my other responsibilities,
Sure.
but with Virginia and the SEAL, you know, I for a while I think I was treasurer with SEAL for a little bit, and they're all, again, great group of people. I think what it does is it builds a sense of community. You know, we're not just at the, you know, from the local level to the national level. You get to see these people at the meetings and the conferences. Lately, or most recently, DePaul, we've joined Malco.
Okay.
Which is the Midwestern Association.
group.
Yeah, and so I've kind of expanded, and you know, there's another group of folks that I work
Yeah,
with.
good.
Librarians, they're great people. What can I say?
Absolutely. Well, and you're fortunate, I would say, that the Virginia and Southeastern groups, very active,
Mhm.
lots of good people, many of whom you've already mentioned.
Sure.
And Chicago, the same way, as a
Mhm.
chapter with a lot of history, and,
Right.
but a lot of good people in a wide variety, both academics,
As well
privates,
as
et cetera.
firms
And clearly, there's always an ebb and flow to your to one's involvement on the local level. You know,
yeah.
you do what you can at the time, and then there'll be other times where you'll have more chances to do things.
Mhm.
So we'll keep thinking about being professionally active, but
Mhm.
let's put you back in the director role.
Okay.
It's not easy for today's law librarian to find time and the institutional support to participate in these professional activities. So, one, do you have any suggestions to newer colleagues as to how they can get involved? And two, what is the approach or attitude that you take with your own people and in terms of providing support for involvement and the like?
Well, that's an interesting question at this time.
That's
Because one of the first things to go when we're looking at the budget is money for professional development. And in fact, I had to educate the administration about the need for the librarians to have professional development just as well as the members of the teaching faculty. And I don't think they were aware of that because, let me just backtrack and explain, you know, most schools are having some issues now budgetarily.
Absolutely.
As are we. And we're looking at the new budget, and one of the things that, as I said, that they curtailed travel for faculty and paying dues for, you know, professional organizations. They limited it. And so the blanket statement was that they wouldn't cover any, you know, dues for any professional organizations. And I had to approach them and say, you know, we're professionals too, and this should be included. If you're going to pay for the faculty for, you know, the ABA, but not, you know, for other organizations, then you should at least pay for AALL for the professional librarians. And they agreed, okay, after I made it clear to them. So I do support it. I encourage the professional librarians as well as the support staff to take advantage of any professional development that might be available through ALA or any other organization, you know, local organization that they might want to attend something that would be, you know, beneficial to them, improve their, you know, their skill set or anything like that.
Well, I would say that it seemed like being in Chicago is a fortunate circumstance with that regard because there's lots of things going on in the city, so maybe travel, you don't necessarily have to travel somewhere to have those educational opportunities. Also, we talked before about the importance of technology delivering information to, we were talking about in the context of law students and lawyers, but same applies to librarians and now AALL with its webinars and the like, and again, that makes it possible to do that. Let's take it slightly from a different angle. You say you're talking to some individual who's new to the profession or thinking about joining the profession, saying, you know, it's going to cost me money to join these organizations or to travel, or boy, I'm really my job takes up all the time I can afford. I really don't feel like it's going to be beneficial for me to, on balance, to participate. What do you say to someone like that?
Well, I'd say you should at least try to do it at least once so you can see what it's like. You know, if you're talking about someone who's never done it
Yeah.
before, because as I said, it opened up so many doors for me that first year I went. And I look forward to going every year. I think I've missed maybe 1 year in 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah, maybe one or two. But the point is, the connections and the contacts that you make, if you want to continue in this profession, they're priceless. So it's an investment in a way. Think of it as an investment. That if you do put the money down to join and to attend one or two or whatever the case is, that you'll meet people. You'll find out about all sorts of opportunities. You'll be able to exchange information about, you may have a problem or an issue with your school, and someone else has the same problem or issue, and they have a suggestion for how you can solve it. I mean, so that potential for collaborating and all of that is really something I think is important.
Well, I think that would be a very good and useful message to deliver to someone like that. And we're hoping that one of the goals of this project is to allow us to deliver that type of message in a variety of ways by a variety of people to newer folks who will view these oral history interviews. Well, this has been very, very interesting. We're kind of nearing the end of our conversation, but I want to make sure that you have the opportunity to touch on any topics that we might not have addressed yet, either through my questions or your responses. So is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I can't think of anything right now, other than I think this is a great project. I'm really glad that you're doing it. I think it's something that's going to be, good for generations, to know that, people pursued this and they sat down and talked about how they got into the profession. So thanks for doing it.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan. On behalf of Pat Keogh, Michelle Wu, and Dick Spinelli, my colleagues with the Oral History of Law Librarianship Project, I want to thank you for taking time from what I know is a busy schedule, doing double duty over technology in the libraries at DePaul, to speak with us today about your experiences as a law librarian. Your remarks will be a valuable addition to the project and of interest to both current colleagues and those who join the profession in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you.